China just triggered the most dangerous military miscalculation in the history of the Pacific. In a single week, Xi Jinping made 3 moves that he believed would finally break American dominance in Asia. He encircled Taiwan with the largest naval blockade exercise ever recorded. He cut an undersea cable connecting Japan to the United States, and he quietly ordered 180,000 People's Liberation Army troops into forward staging positions along the Taiwan Strait. Xi expected silence, he expected hesitation, he expected the same slow, bureaucratic response he has watched from Washington for the past decade. What he got instead changed everything, because the United States did not panic, it did not negotiate, it did not send diplomats, it sent submarines. And right now, as you are watching this video, those submarines are sitting less than 90 nautical miles from China's most critical naval installation, completely invisible, completely undetectable, and completely armed. This is not a drill. This is not a warning shot. This is the beginning of a response so precise, so devastating in its strategic geometry, that even China's own military analysts have begun referring to it in classified briefings as the situation that cannot be undone. Xi Jinping spent 20 years building a military designed to expel the United States from the Pacific. Today, that military is staring directly into a trap it helped build. Stay with me, because what you are about to hear will completely change how you understand the power balance in Asia, and why China's boldest move may have just become its last. To understand why China just made the worst mistake in its modern military history, you need to understand what happened in a 72-hour window that most of the world missed entirely. It began on a Tuesday morning in May 2026. The People's Liberation Army Navy, the PLAN, launched what Beijing officially called Exercise Joint Sword 2. On paper, it was a military drill. In reality, it was a rehearsal for the complete naval encirclement of Taiwan. China deployed 46 warships, 6 submarines, and more than 150 aircraft into the waters surrounding the island in a single coordinated movement. This was not a show of force. This was a dress rehearsal for an invasion. But that was only the first move. 48 hours later, a Chinese state-owned vessel, disguised as a civilian cargo ship, dragged its anchor across the seabed of the South China Sea and severed a critical undersea fiber optic cable. This cable was not just internet infrastructure. It carried encrypted military communications between the United States Indo-Pacific Command in Honolulu and its forward operating bases in Japan, the Philippines, and Guam. In one deliberate act of undersea sabotage, China attempted to blind the most powerful military communications network in the world. And then came the third move, the one that crossed a line that no Chinese leader had ever crossed before. Chinese Coast Guard vessels physically boarded a Philippine Navy resupply ship in the Spratly Islands, detained its crew for 6 hours, and confiscated its weapons. The Philippines is a treaty ally of the United States. Under the 1951 Mutual Defense Treaty, an attack on Philippine armed forces is legally equivalent to an attack on American armed forces. Xi Jinping had just attacked the United States, not with missiles, not with a declaration of war, but with a cold, calculated act of military aggression against an American treaty partner, in broad daylight, with cameras rolling, and with absolute confidence that America would look the other way. That confidence was his biggest mistake, because what happened next, what the United States did in the silence that followed, is something the People's Liberation Army never wargamed, never planned for, never believed was possible. We will get to that. But first, I want to show you something that reveals the true cost of Xi Jinping's gamble. Not in ships or submarines, but in people. I want to show you an image, and I want you to remember it, because we will come back to it at the end of this video. My father was a fisherman, his father was a fisherman, and his father before him. We have fished these waters for 100 years. Now there are warships where the fish used to be. And no one asks us. No one tells us anything. We just watch from the shore, and we wonder if our sons will ever come home. This is a Filipino fisherman from the island of Palawan, speaking to a regional news crew just days after Chinese Coast Guard vessels seized the resupply ship. He is not a military analyst. He is not a politician. He is the face of what China's territorial aggression actually looks like when you strip away the naval maps and the diplomatic language. His fishing waters his family has worked for a century, are now occupied by a foreign navy that answers to a single man in Beijing. That man sent those ships. That man made that decision. and that man believes that no one is powerful enough to stop him. Remember this, fisherman, because by the time this video ends, you will understand exactly why the world Xi Jinping thought he was building. The world where Beijing controls the South China Sea, where American power retreats from Asia, where small nations bow to Beijing's demands. That world is already collapsing, and it is collapsing because of a response so overwhelming, so perfectly constructed, that it was already in motion before China fired its first shot. So what exactly did the United States do? Let's start with the move that shocked every military strategist from Washington to Tokyo. The move that nobody saw coming. Within 96 hours of China's naval encirclement exercise, the Pentagon activated what is internally called the Pacific Sentinel Protocol. This is not a publicly acknowledged military doctrine, but its effects are being felt across every square kilometer of the Western Pacific right now. Here is what that protocol looks like in practice. The United States Navy quietly repositioned 12 Virginia-class attack submarines into the Pacific theater in a single coordinated movement. These are not Cold War relics. Virginia-class submarines are the most advanced undersea warfare platforms ever built by any nation on Earth. Each one carries up to 65 weapons: Tomahawk cruise missiles, Mark 48 torpedoes, and anti-ship missiles with a range of more than 1,000 kilometers. They are so quiet that China's most advanced sonar systems, the ones installed on its brand new Type 055 destroyers, cannot detect them beyond 3 nautical miles. Right now, 12 of these submarines are positioned in a loose arc stretching from the Luzon Strait in the south to the waters east of Okinawa in the north. Military analysts at the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington describe this positioning as a subsurface kill chain, a network of underwater firing platforms that can strike any point in the South China Sea or the Taiwan Strait within minutes of receiving an order. China's 79 surface warships, the ones it deployed in Exercise Joint Sword 2, are sitting inside this arc. They cannot see the submarines beneath them. They cannot locate them. They cannot move without those submarines tracking every meter of their route. Xi Jinping deployed 46 warships to intimidate Taiwan. He has accidentally surrounded them with the most lethal undersea force in military history. But the submarines are only the beginning of this story. And what is happening on land, in the bases, in the airfields, in the missile batteries, is even more alarming for Beijing. We will get to that shortly. Let's move north to Japan, because what is happening here may be the single most consequential military transformation in Asia since the end of World War II. For 70 years, Japan maintained a strict pacifist constitution. Its military, officially called the Self-Defense Forces, was legally forbidden from offensive combat operations. Japan could defend its own soil, but nothing more. That era is now over. In December 2022, Japan quietly announced the largest military expansion in its post-war history. But it was China's recent aggression in the South China Sea and the Taiwan Strait that turned that announcement into emergency action. Japan is now spending 2% of its GDP on defense, double its previous limit, amounting to $80 billion per year by 2027. That is the third largest defense budget on the planet. But the numbers are not even the most important part. Japan has fundamentally changed what it is allowed to do with that military. Under its new national security strategy, Japan now has the legal authority to conduct preemptive strikes on enemy missile launch sites. This is a seismic shift. Japan, the nation that lived under America's nuclear umbrella for 70 years and never pointed a weapon at a foreign country, now has the legal right to strike Chinese missile installations on the Chinese mainland if those installations are deemed an imminent threat. And the weapons to do it are already being purchased. Japan is acquiring 400 Tomahawk cruise missiles from the United States, land attack weapons with a range of 1,600 kilometers. From launch sites in southern Japan, those missiles can reach every major Chinese naval base on the East China coast, including the massive Zhoushan Naval Complex that houses China's East Sea Fleet. Japan has also commissioned 12 new attack submarines to match China's expanding undersea force, and it is deploying its own long-range radar array linked directly to the U.S. Pacific Command network across the Ryukyu Islands chain that stretches from the Japanese mainland all the way to the edge of Taiwan's air defense zone. Xi Jinping spent 20 years trying to push the United States out of Asia. In doing so, he has created the most powerful Japanese military since 1945. Now let's look south, because what is happening in the Philippines right now has completely redrawn the strategic map of the South China Sea. For years, the Philippines under its previous leadership maintained an awkward neutrality between Washington and Beijing. Chinese money flowed in, Chinese pressure was tolerated, Philippine fishermen were harassed in their own waters while Manila looked away. That is finished. The boarding of the Philippine resupply ship, the detention of its sailors, the confiscation of its weapons broke something in Manila that cannot be repaired. Within 72 hours of that incident, the Philippine government formally invoked consultations under its Mutual Defense Treaty with the United States. Within 1 week, the Pentagon and the Philippine military signed an expanded agreement, granting U.S. forces access to 9 military bases across the Philippine archipelago, including 4 bases in the northern Luzon region that sit directly across the Luzon Strait from Taiwan. This is not a small detail. This is a geographic revolution. The Luzon Strait is the most critical waterway in the entire Western Pacific. It is the only deep water route through which China's South Sea Fleet and its submarines must pass to enter the open Pacific Ocean. If the United States controls bases on both sides of that strait, and it now effectively does, with bases in Japan's Okinawa to the north and the Philippines to the south, China's submarine force is bottled inside the first island chain. Every Chinese nuclear ballistic missile submarine that tries to reach open ocean patrol depth must pass through a corridor that is now flanked by American radar, American underwater sensors, and American attack submarines. The Philippines did not mean to help build the world's most perfect submarine trap, but China's aggression made it inevitable. And there is now a U.S. Marine Littoral Regiment permanently deployed to Luzon, a fast-moving, anti-ship missile-equipped unit specifically designed to threaten surface warships from land. Its missile systems have a range of 180 kilometers. They can reach any vessel in the northern South China Sea without leaving Philippine soil. Let's go further south to a move so large in scale that even America's closest allies were surprised by its ambition. Australia is building the most powerful military it has possessed in its entire history, and it is doing it at a speed that has alarmed Beijing's military planners far more than any single weapon system. Under the AUKUS agreement signed with the United States and the United Kingdom, Australia is receiving nuclear-powered attack submarines. Not nuclear-armed, but nuclear-powered. This is the technology that defines the difference between a regional navy and a global one. Nuclear propulsion means these submarines can remain submerged for months, travel at speeds of more than 25 knots underwater, and operate anywhere in the Indian Ocean, the Pacific, or the South China Sea without surfacing to refuel. The total investment is 368 billion Australian dollars over the next 2 decades. This is the single largest defense procurement in Australian history. Larger, in real terms, than the entire cost of Australia's involvement in every war it has ever fought combined. But the submarines are not even what worries Beijing the most. Australia is simultaneously purchasing 220 long-range Tomahawk missiles, deploying American B-52 bombers to its northern bases on a rotational basis, and building a new joint intelligence facility in Western Australia specifically designed to track Chinese submarine movements in the Indian Ocean. Michael Shoebridge, Director of Defense Strategy at the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, put it plainly: Australia has made a generational decision that it can no longer rely on distance for its security. The tyranny of geography is now being replaced by the capability of technology. China spent years believing that Australia was too far away and too economically dependent on Chinese trade to ever become a serious military threat. That calculation just collapsed. Australia's northern ports are now forward logistics hubs for American naval operations. Its intelligence networks are now integrated into the U.S. Pacific Command's real-time targeting architecture. And its submarines, when they are fully operational, will permanently add a southern arm to the undersea trap that is already closing around China's navy from the north and east. Let's move back north now, because there is one country in this story that China's military planners consistently underestimate, and they do so at their own catastrophic peril: South Korea. South Korea is not a Pacific power in the way that Japan or Australia are. It is a peninsula nation with a land border to the north and a political culture that has historically tried to remain insulated from great power competition. For years, Seoul walked a careful line between its alliance with Washington and its enormous trade relationship with Beijing. That line has been obliterated. North Korea's relentless missile testing, its transfer of ballistic missiles and ammunition to Russia for use in Ukraine, and China's open tolerance of Pyongyang's behavior have collectively pushed South Korea into a military posture that would have been unthinkable 5 years ago. South Korea is now the world's 9th largest defense spender. It has the 6th largest active military on the planet, and it is producing weapons at a rate that has made it the most important defense export nation in Asia. But here is the detail that Beijing truly cannot afford to ignore. South Korea has quietly developed the capability to produce a nuclear weapon within weeks, not years. It possesses the enriched uranium, the delivery systems, and the technical expertise. The only thing separating South Korea from a nuclear arsenal is a political decision. And as China's behavior in the Taiwan Strait becomes more aggressive, that political decision is moving closer to yes with every passing month. A 2026 poll conducted by the Korea Institute for National Unification found that 74% of South Korean citizens now support developing an independent nuclear weapons capability. That is not a fringe position. That is the majority view of a 52 million person democracy allied with the United States. Xi Jinping's aggression in the Taiwan Strait is not just mobilizing Japan and the Philippines and Australia. It is pushing South Korea toward the one capability that China has spent 30 years trying to prevent from appearing on its eastern flank. And there is nothing Beijing can do about it that will not make the situation worse. And now we must talk about Taiwan directly, because everything happening in this story ultimately comes back to this 36,000 square kilometer island that Xi Jinping has spent his entire political career planning to absorb. For years, Taiwan's military was described, even by friendly analysts, as outmatched, underfunded, and psychologically unprepared. China had 1,200 ballistic missiles pointed at the island. It had submarines, destroyers, and amphibious assault ships rehearsing an invasion. Taiwan had old American fighter jets, a small navy, and a conscript army with service terms so short, 4 months until recently, that its soldiers barely had time to learn to shoot. That Taiwan is gone. In direct response to China's naval exercises and the broader Indo-Pacific military buildup, Taiwan has made several decisions that have fundamentally changed the invasion calculus. First, Taiwan has extended mandatory military service to 1 full year, effective immediately, and has begun a reserve force training program modeled on Israel's military structure, designed to produce a trained reserve force of 2.3 million soldiers within 5 years. Second, Taiwan has purchased 400 Harpoon anti-ship missiles and deployed them in hardened coastal batteries around the island. Each Harpoon has a range of 124 kilometers and a terminal guidance system accurate to within meters. Any Chinese amphibious assault fleet approaching Taiwan's shores would have to sail through a wall of 400 anti-ship missiles before a single soldier could set foot on a beach. Third, and most critically, Taiwan has dispersed its air force. After watching Russia's failures in Ukraine, where aircraft parked in concentrated airfields were destroyed in the first hours of the conflict, Taiwan has begun operating its fighter jets from highway airstrips, a concept tested publicly in September 2023 when F-16S landed and took off from a section of closed highway in southern Taiwan. China's opening missile barrage, the one its planners have rehearsed for 20 years, may destroy the airfields, but it will not destroy the aircraft that are no longer there. Taiwan has turned itself from a target into a trap, and behind every single one of these moves stands the United States, supplying the weapons, sharing the intelligence, and positioning its submarines in the waters that any Chinese invasion fleet would have to cross. Now I want you to step back and look at the complete picture. Look at what Xi Jinping's strategy has produced. He wanted to push the United States out of Asia. Instead, America now has 9 new military bases in the Philippines, more than it had during the Cold War. He wanted to intimidate Japan into neutrality. Instead, Japan is buying 400 Tomahawk cruise missiles and pointing them at Chinese naval bases. He wanted to isolate Taiwan. Instead, Taiwan has 400 anti-ship missiles on its coastline, a 1,000,000-man reserve force in development, and 12 American attack submarines sitting between the island and the Chinese mainland. He wanted to build a world where small nations feared Beijing more than they trusted Washington. Instead, that Filipino fisherman's government just handed the United States 4 military bases on the island of Luzon, the most strategically valuable real estate in the entire Pacific theater. In other words, China's entire military strategy for the last 20 years has been made obsolete in the space of 6 months. And it was made obsolete by China itself, by Xi Jinping's own decision to intimidate the Philippines, to cut the undersea cable, to launch Joint Sword 2. Every act of aggression accelerated the response. Every threat tightened the trap. The irony is almost too much to comprehend. The South China Sea that China claimed as its own lake, the one inside its infamous nine-dash line, the one its Coast Guard patrols as if it were sovereign territory, is now ringed by a cordon of American and allied military power unlike anything the region has ever seen. China cannot project naval power east of the first island chain without sailing past 12 American submarines. It cannot launch ballistic missiles at Taiwan without triggering Japanese Tomahawk strikes on its own launch sites. It cannot blockade Taiwan without sailing through a gauntlet of 400 Filipino-based Harpoon missiles and an American Marine littoral regiment that can sink warships from land. And it cannot undo any of it, because every element of this response was triggered by China's own behavior, ratified by democratic governments, funded by democratic parliaments, and welcomed by populations that have watched China's conduct in the South China Sea for years and drawn their own conclusions. Xi Jinping wanted history to remember him as the man who reunified China and reclaimed Taiwan. The history being written right now is something very different. It is the history of a leader who looked at the most powerful military alliance in the world, decided to test its patience one too many times, and discovered, too late, that patience has a limit. That limit was the South China Sea. That limit was the Filipino fishermen on the shore. That limit was the undersea cable dragged across the seabed by a ship flying a civilian flag. That limit was 180,000 PLA troops moved into forward staging positions in a gamble that assumed American hesitation and got American submarines instead. Xi Jinping made his biggest mistake, and the United States, quietly, precisely, and without a single press conference, has already responded in a way that changes the Pacific forever. Thank you for watching. If this video helped you understand what is really happening in the Pacific, beyond the headlines, beyond the diplomatic statements, beyond the noise, please hit the like button now. It takes 1 second, and it is the single most powerful thing you can do to make sure this analysis reaches the people who need to see it. And leave a comment below. Tell me, do you think China will back down from Taiwan, or has Xi Jinping already committed to a path he cannot reverse? I read every single comment, and your perspective matters. Subscribe if you are not already part of this community, because the story we just told is not finished. The next chapter is coming, and when it does, we will be the first to break it down for you.